This is Edvard Munch's Scream, one of the world's most recognizable images.
I always ask kids, have you used the scream emoji? They're like, yeah. Okay, so what does it look like? And then they all go, yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's Scream.
And this iconic painting has its own Scream-worthy history.
Criminal activity just is always going to exist in the art world.
It's sort of feeling like a national grief in a way.
From its theft not once, but twice, to briefly becoming the most expensive artwork ever sold at auction, this is the incredible history of Edvard Munch's Scream. Edvard Munch was born in Norway in 1863, but his young life was overshadowed by illness and family tragedy.
When Edvard Munch was 5, he lost his mother to tuberculosis. And when Edvard Munch was 14 and his older sister Sophie was 15, he lost her as well to tuberculosis.
The tragic decline of his sister Sophie was depicted in one of Munch's earliest paintings, The Sick Child, a scene he returned to again and again throughout his career.
He had a very strict and religious father who was a military doctor working at Akershus fortress.
In Edvard's words, "My father was temperamentally nervous and obsessively religious. From him I inherited the seeds of madness."
He wanted him to become an engineer, he wanted him to have a good life, but Edvard Munch, a couple of weeks before he turned 17, he wrote in his diary that he had decided to become a painter.
To become a painter in late 19th century Norway meant embracing the trends of the period, and that meant realism and naturalism.
But Edvard Munch slowly figures out that maybe that's not exactly what he wants to do. He studies in France and he kind of figures out how he wants to paint.
Munch wrote, "No longer shall I paint interiors with men reading and women knitting. I will paint living people who breathe and feel and suffer and love."
And that's exactly what he does. It's sort of like the precursor to Expressionism. Not necessarily look to the realistic depiction of reality around you, but rather go inwards and trying to express that onto a canvas.
It was around this time that Munch sketched out in crayon one of the earliest versions of Scream. But Scream doesn't stand alone. It's part of a series of works known as the Frieze of Life.
So the Frieze of Life had 4 different themes. The seed of love, the blossoming of that love and deterioration of love. The third one was anxiety. The fourth was death, of course. Scream falls under the third theme here, which is anxiety. So it's said that Scream is an experience that Munch had himself from a place called Ekeberg. And there Edvard Munch walked along with 2 friends where he suddenly felt this emotion or this fear. And the sky turned blood red.
Munch documented this moment in his diary, writing, "I felt a breath of melancholy, an exhausting pain under my heart. I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I felt that a great infinite scream went through nature." And this moment of panic and anxiety inspired other works in the Frieze of Life series.
Edvard Munch did create many different versions of the same motive throughout his life, including Scream.
But there are 3 versions that have become the most well-known, and each has its own unbelievable story to tell. This is the earliest painted version of Scream. It's painted with oil and tempera on cardboard. It's distinguishable by the large wax stain, supposedly created by Munch himself. It was purchased from Munch by the Norwegian industrialist Olaf Skau, who donated it to the National Gallery in Oslo in 1910, and it remained there for nearly a century, until one night in February 1994.
So 1994 theft, the day of the launch of the Lillehammer Olympics. When you look at the Winter Olympics medal tables, Norway is either first or second all the time. So just imagine all of the eyeballs of a nation are sitting watching an opening ceremony of an Olympics in which they are 100% invested. 2 thieves climb the ladder, open the window, grab the picture from the wall, get back down the ladder, leaving a note that says, "Thanks very much for the lax security, mate," and leg it within about a minute and a half.
One of the world's most famous modern paintings, The Scream by Edvard Munch, has been stolen from...
The recovery of the work came from a guy called Charlie Hill, who I knew directly. He was my dissertation supervisor back in 2011.
Charles Hill was an art world expert hired by New Scotland Yard to track down the thieves. And one of the suspects was an ex-professional footballer called Paul Enger.
He had been convicted in 1988, I believe, for stealing another work by Edvard Munch.
And Enger even appeared to be leaving intentional clues, announcing the birth of his son in a national newspaper, Med et Skrik, with a scream. Disguising himself as a representative from the Getty Museum looking to acquire the painting, Charles Hill managed to arrange an exchange with Enger and his accomplices.
When he viewed the work, he knew it was authentic because of the wax that Munch spilt when he created the work. It has a real kind of personal significance because it's sort of Charlie, my mate, was the man who secured this picture on behalf of the Norwegian state. Quite important, I think.
Towards the end of his life, Edvard Munch decided to bequeath his entire collection of paintings to the city of Oslo. And within that collection was the last version of Scream that Munch ever painted.
He also had a great hope of having his own museum, and voila, here we are, with all of his works. So I think it was around 26,000 art objects that we acquired from his home.
But like its predecessor, this version of Scream didn't remain safely inside its museum.
2 people came in with guns and said, "Everyone down." And everyone went down. And they came in and stole the Scream and Madonna. Then they ran out where there was a car waiting and drove off.
That was the first armed robbery from an art museum that happened in this country. So I think people were just, they couldn't believe it.
The Oslo regional government offered a recovery fee of 2 million kroner, and then M&Ms matched that with the offer of 2 million M&Ms for the successful recovery of the work. Sounded like a reasonably good deal if you had access to the knowledge of where it was. The timing of that offer and the successful recovery of the picture, very, very close. We're talking about days here. So,
When the paintings were safely back in the hands of the Munch Museum, it became clear that they had been damaged during their time away.
They were actually exhibited in that semi-damaged state for a number of days, after which they were restored, and you can now still see them in a restored light.
A painting on cardboard like the Scream is a quite unusual combination of materials.
Perhaps the most noticeable damage to the painting was a large liquid stain in the bottom left-hand corner.
When it comes to conservation, we ended up not doing anything about the stain and the tide line. It was too risky to do anything about the tide line. We did consolidation, of course, of the loose paint and loose fibers in the scratched areas and also along the edges. But this is how it looks today. I mean, you still see the stain and the tide line and the scratches. It's become part of the painting's history.
While all this drama was unfolding in public museums, behind the scenes in the realm of private ownership, a pastel version of Scream was passing from collector to collector, going on its own thrilling journey. By 1937, it had made its way to Henriette and Thomas Olsen. In fact, Henriette Olsen was depicted by Munch in a portrait. During the Second World War, the Olsens decided to hide their collection in a hay barn in central Norway. While the art was safe in the hay barn, the Olsens were keeping safe in Britain, and when the war ended, as a mark of their thanks, they donated a work from their collection, The Sick Child, Munch's early depiction of his sister, to the Tate Gallery in London, where it can still be seen today. Scream was passed down to their son Petter Olsen, and in around 2010, 70 years after the painting had come into his family's possession, he decided the time had come to sell it.
I got a phone call to condition check a work of Edvard Munch, which was going to be sold on auction. They opened the crate And when they took off the lid, I just saw immediately that this was the Scream in the private ownership.
The painting was endorsed as authentic and was shipped to New York to be sold by Sotheby's. But nobody could have known that it was about to become the most expensive painting ever sold.
It was sold for $120 million.
Although that figure has since been eclipsed, it still stands in the rankings as one of the most expensive artworks ever sold. Following the sale, the pastel version of Scream briefly went on display at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So despite the tumultuous history of these three paintings, in 2012, all three were on display in public galleries for anyone and everyone to see.
The idea that you can stand in front of that work and say, I've experienced that anxiety or that fear, something that affects you physically. Edvard Munch was so great at that. He was really great at crystallizing emotions and going into the essence of what that emotion is and putting that on display.